Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. This is Rob from Rob's Game Group. It's great to see you. Hope you're doing good. I am here today with a review of a kind of a gaming product. It's a book that, no kidding, called, this is a mouthful, The Role-Playing Game Primer and Old School Playbook. And it is by Chris Gonerman. And if that name sounds familiar to you, it's because you've heard me talk about him in some of my other videos. He is the author of Basic Fantasy, a game that I am very much in love with. This is my go-to for fantasy role-playing, hands down. But we're not going to be into all that. But this is by the same author. I like that cover. Get a little closer there. Shows a game in action. From the back cover, we find that this is not a typical player. And there's a copy of Basic Fantasy on the table there. A little shameless self-promotion, but that's okay. From the back cover, your starting point in old school role-playing games. Are you interested in classic paper and pencil role-playing games, but you have no idea where to start? This is the book for you. The role-playing game primer starts from the very beginning, first showing you how to play, then giving you hints and tips on how to do it better. Later chapters provide guidance for beginning game masters to get you up and running even if you have little or no experience as a player. The RPG primer is aimed at players and GMs of old school pen and pencil role-playing games and their modern retro clones. It features several of the earliest, best known of the old school Renaissance games, the OSRs, including Basic Fantasy by the same author, or same as the author, Osric, Labyrinth Lords, and Swords and Wizardry. So I'm going to kind of do a review here. Got this off of Amazon a while back, and I've been waiting for a chance to do a review for it. It is a paperback, perfect bound book. It's digest size. Binding's very good on it. Color cover, color back cover. Everything in the middle is black and white. And it clocks in at just 62 pages. It is not a hard read at all. It's a very simple read. I sat down with a cup of coffee one night, had a smoke, and just sat and read the book front to back, and I was very pleased with it. But I'm going to go through and I'm going to talk about some of the sections in the book so that you kind of know what's in here and can determine if this is something that you want to pick up for the whopping $5 off of Amazon. Super expensive. So like I said, this is the RPG Primer and Old School Playbook by Chris Gonerman. The binding and quality is very good. We jump right into the book. Pages 2 to 17 read as an example of play that starts at character creation with some players, Chris running the game, and some players, Mike, Sandy, and Joe, playing through their first RPG ever. I don't know if this was an actual playthrough from a convention, maybe. A convention game. That's how it reads. But it's very, very good. It was an enjoyable read. A lot of your examples of how to play in books don't go into a whole lot of detail. They might cover just a round of combat or something. It literally starts with them walking up to the table and expressing an interest in playing an old school role-playing game, and Chris going through the time to explain what it is and taking the time through dialogue to help them create their characters, and you get to kind of be a fly on the wall through the entire process. Like I said, this whole section is very fun to read. It's very well laid out. The dialogue of their conversation, through it, Chris covers and answers a lot of basic questions that players that are either new or new to OSR games are likely to have. He not only goes over how to pick your race and class and roll up stats, but the examples continue as their characters begin to take form. And they even meet in a tavern for the first time. So, classic. And through role play, we see them not only meet in the tavern and begin to get involved in the first adventure, but the dialogue also shows them how they go and buy their gear. Through gameplay in the first adventure, they learn to move silently. They learn how combat works and how dangerous it can be. They learn how to map dungeons as players and use dice and everything else really that goes along with playing an OSR. Or really any role-playing game for that matter. Now, to be fair, and he does talk about that in here, he uses, most of his examples through the book use the basic fantasy role-playing game. And being as that's his baby, well, I mean, hell, it makes sense. I get it. I'm a huge fan of it, so I was happy to see that. He does later in the book talk about some of the other OSRs that are out there, and I'll go over those when we get to that section. But that's all in part 1. Part 2, we go into advice for new players, and I'm not going to read you the book page by page. I never do that. Anybody who came to this video expecting that has never watched one of my videos. I'm going to hit the highlights of what he talks about, and hopefully from that in this video you can decide if this is a book you want to invest your $5 in. So part 2 is advice for new players. He talks about the basics, and I love this. The first bit of advice I can give you is have fun. This is, after all, a game, and that's what it is. There are too many people out there on the internet who take all of this way too seriously, when at the end of the day you got to remember we're here to have fun, and this is just a means of doing that. But he talks about not being afraid to ask the GM questions. Even if it seems like something trivial, ask anyway. Try things, because this is not a computer game. You're not limited by the programming of the computer. It's a fantasy role-playing game. You can do pretty much anything. He talks about saving throws, mortality, which in old school role-playing is something you should definitely talk with new players about. Facing monsters and the need to sometimes run away. Keeping the party together. Something that I as a player love to not do. Especially, not so much in fantasy games, but in sci-fi games. I don't know why. I love to try to split the party up. Like, no, you guys go do that. We'll go do this. And I think it's because I'm just hoping to die horribly in a sci-fi game. Anyway, I digress. Then he talks about mapping. And he goes into a lot of detail on the mapping section, which I thought was really good. And even, I'm going to show some of it here. Not trying to spoil anything, but he goes into how he describes each area and how it should look on the map and how they should map out even odd-shaped rooms. Because I think that's something that's really lost in modern role-playing. And I'm as guilty of it as anybody. We have a lot of these nice new lavish maps from different companies that we want to use, and I've heard people on the forum ask about, what's the deal with using that, because then they just know everything that's on the map. And on one hand, that's true. They know where the rooms are because they can see ahead of time on the map. But you could always cover sections of the map with sheets of paper or cardboard until they get to them. And even if they did see the rooms, they don't necessarily know where the doors are going to be or what's going to be in the room, if anything. So that's still usable. Mapping on grid paper, which is what he's talking about in here, is, or even drawing it out on a map, having them draw it out on a map, is very useful, because then they only are going to see the part of the adventure that they have experienced. They're not going to see anything ahead of time. There's not going to be a pre-drawn map. but they could be doing it on graph paper as well. I know back in the day when we started, we couldn't afford miniatures. Miniatures weren't even really a thing for us when we played. We would just describe stuff and describe the size of the rooms, the length of the hallways, and one person at the table was our group mapper. He would map everything out, and it was actually kind of cool because at the end of the game or campaign or whatever it was we were running, some of us, would always want to have that map as like a keepsake that we probably end up throwing away. But over the years. But having those is kind of cool, and that's also something that comes into another video I have coming up soon. But anyway, that's enough about mapping. We're going to go into running an adventure in part 3. And he uses an example called the Abandoned Tower, which is very similar to the adventure setups that are used in Morgan's Ford or the Chaotic Caves. And I don't want to show the entire book, but he shows how to do the descriptive text, the laying out of the rooms, wandering monsters. And I always love this about basic fantasy, how they put the monsters in each room and then they have the little tick boxes for the hit points. I love that. Let's see, he talks about armor class and hit dice, number of attacks, how the monster stats are broke down. And literally this whole section right here is you could actually play this. This is a level 1 of a dungeon that's pretty much laid out for you already, and he has his own advice in italics print in each section. Like, so after you would read a section to the players, then it has his advice to you as the GM on how to do things. And I thought that was really neat. And then you end up with a little dungeon that can play through. But there's enough information here to teach you to go on and make your own stuff up too, creating an adventure, which he has a section in here on stocking the dungeon, random generation for stocking the dungeon, the key that you use, traps, more monsters, secret rooms, and then that section wraps up when we come to part 5, which is game mastery. And there's a lot here, which is really good. The first one I'm going to hit is, he tells you it's going to be finally time for him to explain what old school means. And we're going to start with Rule 0. And Rule 0 is the game master is always right. I talked about this in another video. Chris has talked about this in videos. I've seen other people talk about this in videos. And yes, a lot of newer role-playing games do tend to steer away from that Dungeon Master fiat or Game Master fiat that we have. But the truth is, if you're the one putting the work in and running the game, then the calls you make should be right, whether it's old school or new school. That's my take on it. But most definitely in old school games, the game master is right. And again, it's not about lording over the players with power. It's about you have to go into it and understand that your game master is going to have to make decisions on the fly about how things are going to work in the story. Because the rules in a lot of the old school games are very open to interpretation. He talks about terminology, keeping it simple, not building railroads, and I agree with that for the most part. Sometimes a railroad is fun, though. Let's see, a little random, or try to be a little random. Try not to develop patterns, scene building, using miniatures and battle maps. That's something that a lot of us are definitely doing these days. And then part 6, which is the last part of the book, talks about other games, and he does talk about how throughout most of this book he's used basic fantasy, which is his baby, for examples, but he talks about some other old OSRs that you could choose from, retro clones. Osric, which is Osric or Osric, I don't know. That's the shorthand for it, I guess. Is the old school reference and index compilation. Now, I haven't played this. I have not read this. I looked at the price of it online and decided I wasn't going to buy it to review it. I know it's popular and a lot of people like it. But good Lord, you could have come up with a better name than that, because that sounds like, hey, we're role-playing the Dewey Decimal System. It's just the old school reference and index compilation. I don't know. It's not, to me, I'm not knocking the game because I'm sure the game is fine. The what I've looked at of the book looks amazing. It's just not a very catchy title, but that's a pet peeve. That's my opinion. Anyway, he talks about that. He talks about Labyrinth Lore. He talks about Swords and Wizardry, which I did a video recently on White Box, the fantastic medieval adventure game, which is a take on Swords and Wizardry White Box. Not the exact same thing. It's more of a cleaned up version of that, from what I understood from the reading of it. And then he talks about, you choosing which one is right for you. Then the rest of it talks about converting the materials, like between these different games, ascending and descending armor classes, movement, morale, alignment, which Basic Fantasy doesn't use, and I'm okay with that because I hate alignment. Other statistics. And he does tell you, pick the one that's right for you and go for it. In the afterward, that's basically what it is. Good luck, have fun, find the game that works for you, and go for it. And then the book is going to end with the open game license. So, yeah, it's a 62-page book, paperback. It's not a hard read. Is it something you need? Well, it depends. Like everything in life, pretty much. If you are new to role-playing games, or if you have someone who's interested in getting into OSR, but they're new to the concept, they've played like 5th Ed or 4th Ed, and they've never played an OSR before, yes. Hell, grab them a copy as a gift and just give it to them. Let them read it. There's a lot of insight here that newer players or players of newer editions may not think about. That being said, I've been playing and running games for 30 plus years. And just in the night that I sat down with this and went through it, I found several times where I read some of the stuff that Chris had put in here, and I went, wow, yeah, I never really thought of it like that. There were several things that clicked for me, and that's after 30 years of playing. So, honestly, I really think that for $5, it doesn't matter whether you're new to OSR, or you're experienced in both. It's a damn good read, and it's $5. So, yeah, go buy the book. It's well worth it. 100%. I enjoyed it. Chris, thank you for putting it out. It was an enjoyable read. I will probably, I'll stick it in my collection, but I'll probably either loan it out or give it to new players I have that are interested in OSRs. But yeah, 100% check it out. It's really good. That is all I have on that for right now. If you enjoyed this video or these types of videos that I do, please consider subscribing. Hit that notification bell and thumbs up. Especially the thumbs up, because that helps us circulate videos. If you would like to communicate more with me, you can find me on Facebook at Rob's Game Group, all one word. And until next week, good gaming and good luck.